Hey guys, what's up? It's Mark here from the RPG podcast. Just doing a quick video on the Switch 2 accessory that we saw filed by Nintendo via the FCC. So there's been a lot going around on this. And what is this device? Is it for the Switch 2? Is it not? And I know a lot of people have gone through the filing. So why should you listen to me? Well, in a previous career, I was a wireless expert. I've done a lot of FCC filings and gone through test houses like this, and even been in the anechoic chamber doing these tests and filing these reports. So I'm able to kind of dissect this and see, what is actually going on here, even though a lot of information is hidden. So I'd love to walk you guys through that for a deep dive and tell you why what you might be reading on the internet may not be true when it comes to this device, and we might know just what it is. So let's jump in. So first up, this is the FCC filing as it stands now. So there's several different documents come in here, right? A lot of them aren't of interest to us, but we'll rip through some of them anyway. So if we pop over, here's just the request for confidentiality. So a lot of people reference this, and rightfully so. They noted the date for some of these things. Now, this one's in perpetuity, right? So this is trade secret stuff. So when you look at what is actually being blocked here, it's the block diagram. A block diagram is going to be just essentially a drawing with squares and rectangles that say, the power component's here, the radio or RF transmitter is here, this other component's here, and that's the design of our device. Very basic. Operational description, they're obviously not going to let you know, hey, this is our trade secret of we're tracking the position or sending data over Wi-Fi in this way. And then the schematics, of course. So that's the very fine detail of where every piece on that PCB board is actually at, and how it's all connected together. So this is totally normal, and we'll pop over to the next one. So short-term confidentiality, this is not uncommon at all. So this is like a product's coming out and you don't want it to be revealed because you're going to show it at some big trade show or whatever it may be. And so you can see here they've limited a few different things. So external photos, so that's the photos of the device, internal photos, any test setup photos, and we're going to dive into the test setup a little bit later because they do describe it. But if there was an actual picture, it might give you a hint as to what this device is going to do. And then the actual user manual for the device, right? So this is stuff that will be added to the portal later, and we'll see it in the FCC filing after this given date, which I believe is sometime in March 22. So one thing to note is that a lot of people are quoting this date here. This is when it was actually posted, right? August 22nd. This device, as we'll see in the rest of the documentation, was actually submitted back in February and tested in March. So it's just a little interesting tidbit that they've been working on this for a while, and that's totally normal. There's a huge queue for the FCC and other testing bodies, and even at the test house that you use, right? And so when I say test house, that's some company that Nintendo contracts to do this. Nintendo doesn't need to be an expert in testing and filing these things and have their own big anechoic chamber, which we'll show a picture of. They just want to pay somebody else to do this that's an expert. So the drawing that everybody's showing, and I went a little bit off the deep end with this one, and I'll show you why here in a second. But this drawing is just a very basic drawing. Typically, it's somewat accurate, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. We'll zoom in here a little bit, and it just says, "Hey, here's the bottom side of our device." It's kind of like looks kind of like a puck, with rounded edges, and then you see the smaller rectangle inside of it, and it notes that the FCC ID is in there on the resin, so it's some type of plastic or resin shell here, and that is depressed. So if you imagine this is some type of device like this, and then in the middle there's a raised or depressed area, and the ID is in there. Now, something interesting is they put 4.5 font is in here. That's extremely small. So I actually went ahead and printed out what 4.5 font is. I don't know if you'll actually be able to see this. We'll pop myself back up here. So 20-point font, 14-point font, 12, 10, all the way down here is your 4.5 font. So very small. So when I say I went off the deep end a little bit, I actually did print this out, right? And then I printed a second copy. I cut out the 4.5 fonts into a strip, right, as a reference. And then I measured across this device, how many of these strips of this 4.5 font in relation to the drawing that it's on go from top to bottom and side to side, right? So not a perfect science, but that's our only point of reference. And so what that comes up with is essentially if I printed 4.5 fonts here with no line spacing, 0 point spacing, it comes out to 31.5 of those. And so a true measurement of that is 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches, or 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters. And since we're squared here, you're looking at 36 centimeters squared, or 6.25 inches squared. So what does that actually look like? It comes out to be, I tore up this little cover to be the exact size, something this big, right? So if you think about my hand, pretty average size hand. Sorry, I'm in a hotel right now. I'm on the road. So about hand sized, right? Okay. Now we don't know the depth of it, but we actually might know a little bit of that, and more on that in a second. So something this small, right? And it's got two different transmitters in it, and we'll see that as we jump into the other documents. So now we know the size, right? It's a little puck-sized device. So popping over to the SAR test report, and this is where things get super interesting, and where I think a lot of people in the media and gaming journalism are incorrect in their predictions. I know there was a Reddit post that everybody wanted to run with because they don't really know how to go through these reports and figure out, what do different things mean. But essentially, SAR test reporting is only needed to be done for devices that are going to be close to the human body, right? So if this was, just in the Switch itself, or in a PS5 or whatever, it's going to sit on a shelf, never going to be like attached to you, held by you. Then you wouldn't have to do this SAR test. And SAR is a specific absorption rate. So essentially, what they're trying to do is say, think of a phone, right? So you have your phone, and when this thing transmits, how much of that radio wave is going into your head or into your body, and is it safe, right? So the FCC and other bodies want to know, does your device do what it says when you power it on? Are you making a hunk of junk that doesn't really work correctly? And when you turn it on, it blasts with like crazy amounts of power, and it can cause cancer or whatever, all those different things. So we'll go into this report really quick, but how do they test this? So let's jump over and look at the testing method. So essentially what they do is they go inside an anechoic chamber, and we can pull up a picture of that too. So an anechoic chamber, it's basically a big box. In this case, these guys used a semi-anechoic chamber, and we can go to image search. So it's a big box meant to reduce the amount of reflections and refractions of the radio waves or the wireless waves from whatever you're testing. And you can see here, this one's even's got a mannequin in it, and we'll touch on that in a second. So you go in this box, it's essentially no noise, no nothing, right? Very stable baseline of what's going on. And so in this case, for their testing, they list out the equipment they used, and this is very common equipment for this type of test. But essentially, they have this table with this dielectric fluid that they put into kind of a mannequin, if you will, a cutout, and that represents the human body. As we know, most of the body is water, right? Like 70-something%. And then they'll put the device next to it, as you can see here. Now, this is just a kind of not a poor example, but just a basic example. The actual test necessarily wouldn't look like this. But if we scroll down, you can see this device, and this is a similar to the device that they quoted as using in the test for this Nintendo device. This is going to measure the wattage per kilogram that's going through the body, if you will, the simulated body. And so you can see here they have kind of a radiation mapping of, like, as the signal goes out and where it's at. But there's truly a better picture down here that gives you a better idea. So here's your mannequin, right? So they fill this with fluid. You put the device by the head or by the body, which would be in the middle. And then you start testing the device, right? And so why is this interesting? So here you can see a phone, right? In this case, they strapped it to the mannequin's head on the underside. So there's fluid in this bucket, if you will, and it's put in this cheek position. And then they turn on the transmit test. And then here you can see it as a tilt position. So it's slightly tilted away. And then they test all these things and see, is it safe to use? And what does that look like for the different orientations of the device? You have front, back, right. And this is important because we're going to see this in the report. Nintendo did not have to test all of these. They only had to test the front, the right, and the tilt. Okay, so you can see here, front side of device, or right cheek in that case, front side of device, so top of the device. So you think about, again, that puck, the front of it, and then the right tilt, right? So you got to tilt it, and then they're going to tilt it the other way. So let's dive back into the report, and we can see, what they're doing with this SAR testing. So all pretty normal here at the beginning. Something of note is the test report number. We will come back to that. So typically you're given a test report number, and then any document within this big report, all the documents we've been looking through, each have a different specifier, right? So you can see this is H, and that's important. We're going to come back to that. Test regulation. This regulation is for portable devices, and they're transmitting. And then you can see just really quick at the top, like, hey, we did a body test, not a head test, a body test, and this was the results of that. And this was mainly for the wireless, the Wi-Fi part, right, the 2.4 gigahertz. So let's go down, and there's a couple of interesting pieces here. So again, receipt date, they got this device in February of 2024. Test date, they tested it in March, right? So they do some basic tests like on a table, and they say like, hey, how much output power does this thing have? Is it within scope? Then they followed up another day and they did the SAR testing, which is again against that body of water, simulating the human body. And that is important because a lot of people think this device is attaching to the switch or isn't built in, it's going to dock on top of it. That's not true in this case, right? They would not have to do this SAR testing. This is going to be somewhere on the human body in some way. So think maybe like the Joy-Con could go in a strap or in a ring fit device. You're holding it, or you strapped it to your leg and it's detecting you, right? So more along those lines, which is much different than what a lot of people are thinking online. Now, another thing a lot of people keyed in on was this bit here. So for the testing, they plugged in and they used an actual switch adapter. It's actually noted by the product ID in here, USB switch adapter to power the device during testing. And you could see battery not applicable, and body worn accessory not applicable. That has zero bearing on this testing, in my opinion. Of course, there can be a battery in this device. There's a lot of other components in this device that are not listed here. It's under the confidentiality agreement. You're not going to know what microcontroller is in there. That is essentially the CPU, if you will, controlling the two wireless transmitting devices. You're not going to know any of the capacitors, any of that stuff. Body worn accessory, not applicable. So I think people saw this and immediately went, oh, well, it's not body worn. It's not going over there. Think of this as like, it's not going to be on you, touching your skin. It's not classified as a body worn accessory like a heart rate sensor for somebody that's running marathons. It uses that conductiveness against your body to detect the heart rate. What is actually in the device? Everybody got this right. It's very easy, right? There's a wireless device. It's only 2.4 gigahertz. It's using an inverted F antenna. And then the 24 gigahertz sensor, right? And it's using the FMCW, which is your frequency modulated continuous wave radar, if you will. So sending a continuous signal and then tracking when that signal comes back to see the difference. And what does this do? It allows you to track the approximate distance and movement and speed or velocity of a given device or person, down to within centimeters, right? And for this type of device, that's going to be accurate up to like 20 to 30 meters. So very fine tune of like where you're at. So you're already in your head kind of thinking like an Xbox Connect type sensor, Just Dance, those types of games. But the interesting thing is, again, SAR report here, body testing, this is going to be on the person, not on the switch. So you would think this would be on the switch or the, whatever the console is, and it would track out at the people or the players. But in this case, it's actually on the player or players. And so what does that mean? And we'll speculate about that a little bit more in a second. So just going down really quick, I just wanted to touch on a couple more things here. So they talk about the SAR reports, and here we go. The standalone SAR result, right? So you can see here, I'm highlighting this for the head. They didn't have to do any testing. So this is not a headset. I know some people speculate AR, VR headset. No, not at all. In this case, because this is not going to be up by the head, they would have to test that. Body worn. Now remember, we saw body worn accessory said no. But the testing shows that that's what they had to test for. DTS is digital transmission system. So everything in there that transmits, they're going to run that and test it against the body. So again, this puck device, we don't know necessarily the depth of it, but it's going to be on the body. Now, why don't we see a test result or report for the 24 gigahertz piece? Well, simultaneous transmission by the FCC, they are allowed to kind of roll that up in here, and then you can see the results of both, right? So if there's a lower power transmitting device on there, you really only need to see the higher power one and then combine the exposure, and that's seen here, right? So the 24 gigahertz, you can see 0.041, and then the larger number is actually the Wi-Fi device, which is 0.275. So another key thing here is, remember I mentioned that report number at the top. This says that they, tested according to the standards, and the value for this guy is quoted from test report number yada 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 H dash I and dash J. Now, what was this one here at the top? Let's go check it out again. There's H-G, no I or J, right? So this is, again, mainly the results for that Wi-Fi piece. They have not published the report yet for the 24 gigahertz piece. And why? Because I think that is extremely telling of what the device does. So this paperwork has been submitted by this test house. The FCC has it. They've approved of this device. Has not been published yet. They have another report. It has a report number, the I and the J. This is H, right? So we will see that uploaded in the future. Now, near future, I don't know, maybe after the device is announced, or just at that confidentiality date later on. Notice that there's no limbs. Now, FCC doesn't necessarily require limb testing, like if this is going to be on your foot or in your hand, but other countries do. So, like IC testing over in Europe or the EU, some of those countries do want you to have that limb testing. So it's not necessarily a dead giveaway that this is not going to be held in your hand or attached to your arm, but it'll be somewhere on your body, not the head. So the rest of the report really just dives into the transmission, right, of the device. So we can jump over to a couple other ones. Now, remember in the previous one, we said that they specified the two transmitting devices, the Wi-Fi and the 24 gigahertz millimeter wave tracker sensor, and they specified what type of antenna for each. So there was a patch and a PIFA antenna. So here's the PIFA antenna, and it's specified here for the Wi-Fi, but it's not specified for the 24 gigahertz. And again, the document has not been published yet. So we will see that here in the future. And essentially what this is, guys, is they say, like, this is the type of antenna. Here's the device. You can see the spikes from the anechoic chamber. And they transmit and receive using this machine that, laptop or computer that's plugged in. And they just test, what is the radiation pattern? Is it doing anything super weird? And you can see the pattern here, right? So kind of that blue line as it goes out. That's where the signal is reaching to, if you will. Now, true full test reports. This is not for the SAR. This is just a test report of the device itself. And there is some interesting information in here, mainly just how they set up the test and the EUT or the equipment under test. Sometimes it's called the DUT or device under test. They do note that it is an engineering prototype, not for sale, but it'll be equivalent to mass-produced items, right? So that to me screams an accessory that, this is the close to final design that they felt confident in to send to testing. Now, that doesn't mean this can't change, they can submit things like a class 2 permissive change. And what that essentially says is like, hey, we went back and did more testing at Nintendo. We found that this antenna is better. It helps track the player better, or it gives us a better connection. As long as it's not increasing in power or signal, it's the same or less, they can go file just a paperwork change and not have to retest anything. Now, if they want to make any more drastic changes where the device gets stronger or maybe more refined in what it can do, then they're going to have to go back and redo all this testing, and we would see new reports filed in. One other key thing I just wanted to call out is if we jump back over to our SAR reports, at the bottom here, there is some interesting stuff right here. So you can see the test positions, right, of this EUT or equipment under test, so the actual puck device near that body, right, that fake body of water or dielectric fluid. And so you can see front, rear, left, right, right tilt, B, top, and bottom. Now, the distance in millimeters is interesting because it'll tell us where the radio actually is in this device. So this distance is not distance from device to the body, right? So further in the test, they do denote that they tested at 0 millimeters for worst case scenario. So what that means is they put this device directly up against the body, right? They strapped it to that body of water and they did their transmit testing because they believe this device is going to be on the body, right, or body worn. Now, this distance here that you're seeing on the screen is the distance of the radio in the device to the body. So remember, I'm holding a piece of paper, so it's somewhat two-dimensional. This device is actually three-dimensional, not the correct shape, but more like this, right? So if you put this up against the body, so from the front, we'll call this the front. The front is 7.07 millimeters, right? So take the front, we're going to put it up against the body. And from me, 7 millimeters in, that's where the transmitting device is. Now, from the rear, it's 75 millimeters away, right? So if we flip this device over to the rear and put it up against the body, the radio is now 75 millimeters away. So this can tell you a little bit that the exact positioning within the device, we know an approximate in centimeters or convert to millimeters, which I'll probably draw this up and post it up in a separate video. Where is the radio in this, and the actual size and somewhat dimensions of the device. So just interesting that the radio is kind of recessed in and up in one corner essentially when they did this testing. Now their actual testing, something that people probably didn't notice, we're going to have to zoom in for this. When they did this testing, so you can see here in this little chart, if you will, the main antenna for the WLAN 2.4, so that's your Wi-Fi, and here is the test results. So separation distance, we just saw these numbers, right? 7.07 millimeters, we just talked about. The milliwatts are power. And then you can see if it was required or excluded. So they expect this device to be oriented a certain way when you wear it and use it with your Switch 2. And so you can see front was included, right was included. They had to do the tilt, right? So tilting the device away a little bit. And that's pretty normal for anything that's going to be up against the body or the head. You don't have to, it's not because it's like a phone, right? I'm going to talk or take the device away. Fairly normal to have a tilt because it could change, how it's affecting the body or penetrating the body. But they did not have to do rear, left, top, or bottom. They only did these front right testing. So again, this device up on the body somewhere and doing that testing. And here's reiterating that, right? So distance, 0 millimeters. It was literally strapped up against that fake body of water. And then they tested these pieces here. So what does all of this mean? We went through the reports. We see that, we see that they did this various testing. What everybody's kind of talking about online may not be accurate. So why, and this is where the fun begins, the speculation, why do you need this puck device as an accessory for the Switch 2? Random speculations from me. This device is some type of puck. It's got a USB-C port. It can be charged, is my guess, right? Even though it said no battery in the report, there's a lot of components that are not listed in this, and I would be shocked if there was not a battery for this device. It's going to be body worn somewhere. It has a position tracker and it has a Wi-Fi chip. The Wi-Fi chip, I don't think is connecting to your router. I think it's going to be used for a Wi-Fi direct connection for better and more reliable throughput to the device, right? So instead of using Bluetooth or BLE to the Switch 2, they're going to do a Wi-Fi direct connection. The Switch 2 is going to essentially act as a hotspot in that, and then they initiate the connection, and that allows for data transfer of calculations from that 224 gigahertz sensor that's doing real-time position tracking, right? So the interesting thing is that that type of position tracker, or that type of radar, if you will, is usually used by the stationary device. So think like this is oversimplifying, but like a cop's radar sensor. They're going to sit still and they're going to point it and they're tracking the moving device, right? So the actual sensor, the radio, is stationary and the device is moving and they send a signal and it bounces off and comes back. And the way the modulation works on this, the FMCW, is that essentially, again, extremely simplified, sends out a signal, and then they can modulate the frequency. And then when it comes back, they can see where it lines up with the same frequency. And then they can do a calculation that says, okay, based on by the time this came back and the frequency it was at, because it's a wave, right? And it's either condensed or expanded, depending on the distance and the power. And so when it comes back, they can calculate, hey, since you're now in this frequency in this wave, and it took this long, you're moving at this speed away, right? And you're in this position. So it's interesting that the transceiver, which means it'll transmit and receive, is in the puck device on the player, which we would imagine would be moving, right? In historically with Nintendo, the players moving, they're interacting. Think about Just Dance or Wii Sports. So you would want to have the transceiver on the Switch looking at the player and tracking them. Now, that might be not as accurate, and maybe they found that by having this puck on the player or players, they can get more people together and track all of them simultaneously and do these computations and then send them back to the Switch for a more accurate, not AR, but kind of, right, putting you in the game, movement tracking. I would not be surprised if that is the killer app on top of other accessories that may be able to plug into the Switch on that top port. The dual screen thing, I don't think it's applicable to this at all. So time will tell. I'm going to dig more into these reports and see what I can find. I'd love to figure out and speculate why this is going to be on the player. And I think you should too. I think you should jump in the comments, start talking about it. Let us know what you think. Maybe you have an idea that I didn't think of. Maybe you have some expertise in this stuff like me, and we can chat back and forth. And always, please come check out our podcast if you like content like this. We do deep dive stuff into this. We'll do separate videos, but we get together every other week with three of our co-hosts, and we talk gaming news. And this will definitely be a topic that we're hitting up on the RPGP podcast. So thanks, guys. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, tell your friends. Remember, I don't think everybody's right about what this is. It's a body-worn device, and it's going to track the player. But why? Let's figure out why. Have a great day and keep gaming.